Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Birds TV with Geoff, Mosher, and Adam Caplan, presented, of course, by DraftKings. We've got so much to talk about as the Eagles are entering a really difficult stretch here with a Monday night game against the Seattle Seahawks. They're at 3-6-1. First, happy Thanksgiving to everybody watching. And second, we just had to, by popular demand, Adam, I would say, because we already had people asking us on Twitter, with things being so bad, could we please bring back Joe Banner? So that, and I don't know, Joe, what they're expecting for you to do for the
exactly.
people.
Right.
I don't know if you're going to make.
But we would have had him on,
better.
even if they were doing well, Geoff. We would have had him on just to see what his thoughts were. But yeah,
This exposes me to getting blamed now for whatever.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. Well, but it's nothing new. You've been through this before. You always took, when you would go on. I remember, Joe, with you and Howard Eskin for years. You would come on at your end of the season meeting with Howard for like an hour. You would take it, man, and you would go back and forth with the listeners in WIP, man. I always used to look forward to that because I never know what you would say and how you would react.
Mm-hmm.
And fans, but the thing that fans have told Geoff and I is this: right now because you're great at taking an overview, and your takes are because you were so close to situations, whether it was the Browns or especially with the Eagles. They want to learn something. They want to know why, and they want to know how, and that's what we'll be doing today.
Yes, we will. First, before we get started, I'll tell people to our listeners to download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app today and use code ITB for a special offer when you sign up. That's code ITB for a special offer when you sign up only at DraftKings Sportsbook. So, Joe, I always do this with Adam, before we kind of get into any meat and potatoes of a main topic. When you just kind of take a 30,000-foot view from above with this team, I know you're probably surprised that they have the record they have based on, our past conversations. How does it look just from your vantage point, and where do you go at this point when it's this bad?
I really wish I had great answers to this question, even in just a hypothetical sense. I mean, this has been pretty baffling to me. I mean, I did go into this season thinking the team wasn't as good as it's been the last few years, but was a lot better than it is. So, the strong areas aren't showing up. I mean, I really thought this defensive line would be dominant. I was a big fan of the Hargraves signing. We still got Cox and Graham and some of the other guys, and that's just, even that's not happening, which is really, really surprising to me. Problems at all levels. The criticism the coaches take is very fair. Some of it can get over the top too, but there's challenges there. There are things that can be done better. The talent on the roster, even factoring in the injuries, most of which were unpredictable. We're not where we were a year or two or three ago in terms of those talents. And obviously the players that we really count on aren't playing nearly as well. Obviously Wentz is at the top of that list, but he's far from the only person on that list. Goddard and Ertz, we thought was going to be one of the more dynamic tight end combinations we'd seen in years, and they were showing a proclivity to use that formation and create really, really good mismatches. And even when they were together, it wasn't really dynamic. And now, of course, there's injuries and all the other stuff and quarterback play that's affecting it. So, somebody's got to really step back and be super, super honest with themselves. And looking at the whole organization, each one of those pieces, figuring out, what of these areas are circumstantial and players that are developing or players that were hurt and will take care of themselves, and where we have some really serious problems, to explain this and not pretend that the second category doesn't exist. It definitely does.
Joe, you always talk about the quarterback. We all do, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were lucky enough to have Donovan McNabb. You guys got that one right. But even McNabb went through his struggles. And we know that Andy Reid had to do some things sometimes to get him righted. He had to bench him at times. What were those conversations like when you and Andy would talk and Andy would say, "Hey, Joe, this is what I want to do"? I know you guys were close and you guys would talk every day. But what were those conversations like when Andy would tell you he was going to make a move? It may not be Donovan. It could be any player. What were those conversations like? Because I would think when you make a move like that, it's not just knee-jerk. These things develop over time.
Yeah, I mean, we were very sensitive and strict about kind of chain of command. So those conversations varied. Andy was very good about communicating, and sometimes he was just telling us, here's what I'm going to do, here's why. Could be a major change, could be some free agents, could be a draft pick, could be a coaching, could be anything. There were other times he wanted to engage in a conversation and really talk about, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm seeing, what are you guys seeing, and what are you guys thinking? And hopefully that process made us all a little bit smarter, at least included a variety of perspectives, and then translated into a decision. Now, always he had the authority to make any decision he wanted to, and all of us thought that was the right way it should be. But Andy's much more collaborative than people portrayed him. So those conversations often led to times where he would defer to somebody else, or there was a debate and somebody felt really strongly on something he didn't, and he would actually say, you know, let's go with your conviction here. It seems like you've really studied this. You feel strongly about it. So he's a great communicator, and those that describe him as being, you know, really, you know, control freak, it's stuff like that. It was very inaccurate. He's a very, very collaborative guy. Now, he's a strong leader. He's a decisive guy, so I understood where sometimes people could walk away from that. But I don't picture controlling people as being anywhere near as collaborative or open-minded as Andy was. So those discussions were really valuable, and I like to think they ultimately helped him, even if he was going to decide to defer or make better decisions.
In the same vein, Joe, I wanted to ask you about 2006 when Andy, at 4-4 going into the bye, decided to give play calling to Marty Morningweg. And, you know, obviously that's pertinent now because some have felt that maybe it's in Doug's best interest to kind of take a step back and give play calling to somebody else. But when that happened in 2006, how did that operation work? Was that something Andy had been thinking about for a while? I even went back and looked. They weren't nearly as bad offensively as this Eagles team now, and they were really only in kind of a 2-game rut. But what do you remember about that moment?
Yeah, so not to break the narrative here, but Andy changed in and out of play calling as the play caller quite frequently. What was shocking to us was that he said something publicly. Because his goal was to actually, the way to prevent defenses from getting latched onto your tendencies is to actually change the play caller. So there were times when things were actually going well, and he would, even for a quarter or sometimes for a game or sometimes just to put in the first 15 or 20 plays that you hear about, he would change it up because he thought that would make us unpredictable, because, you know, everybody brings a different bias to something like play calling, and it's hard to be totally in touch with your biases. So Andy would change, you know, somebody would take a quarter or somebody would take the second half, or, you know, he did it in preseason really to help develop coaches. But he did this in season at times. Don't get me wrong. He was the primary play caller overwhelmingly. He was the primary creator of the game plan, even when he had very good people with him to help him do that. But he would say, you know, hey, you know, Brad Childress or Marty Morningweg, you call the plays for a quarter, or you take the second half this week, or, you know, I just don't feel like I'm having my best game, he would say at times. Maybe you're hot today, you know, you pick it up. But it was also a strategy to try to keep us from becoming predictable in the eyes of the defenses that we're playing. So it wasn't surprising to us that he did that. It was very surprising that it was so public, because part of the strategy when he did that was to kind of catch the other team off guard.
Well, if I can follow up, in 2006, though, was that more of a different example where he handed it to Marty for a longer period of time? Because if I remember correctly, Marty took over. 2 weeks later, Garcia became the quarterback when McNabb got hurt, and then it seemed like it was Geoff and Marty kind of their operation, with Andy being the head coach for the rest of the way.
Yeah, I mean, I would never underestimate how involved he was. I mean, a lot of the situational play calling planning is done on the Monday and Tuesday before the game. You may have heard me at times. I say people don't realize how many games are decided on the Tuesday before kickoff. Because if you're not thinking about the game properly and picking up the right strengths and weaknesses and putting in the right plan, you are already likely to lose before the players have done a thing. It's one of the reasons I get annoyed with coaches that always blame execution, because it's certainly important, but it's really an excuse when you think it's the only thing. There were times when Andy felt like he made a change like this, and the intent was either possibly for it to be longer term, or he intended to do it on a short-term basis, but it seemed to be working really well. Could be as simple as a Marty and the quarterback really communicating well and getting on the same page during the week, and it actually would then last for a period of time. And we never knew when it went into it, even in that instance where he announced it. Is this going to be like a 1-week trial? Is it going to be, is it not going to go well for a half? He's going to take it back. Is this going to last for a while? And to be honest, and no disrespect to any of the other offensive coaches we had some really good ones, and they've proved that on their own. Most of us liked it better when Andy was calling the plays, just because we had so much confidence in him. But he was very cognizant. If I can get in a little bit of a rut, you can become predictable. Let's change it up. And if it's going well, why change it back? We're in no rush. It's up to us. We can do whatever we want to do.
Joe, when Andy would go through a struggle in terms of play calling or the offense wasn't doing well, in your daily meetings with him, would you say, hey, what do you ever suggest to him? Hey, do you want to take a step back here? Or is that something that you would not do?
No, I mean, we never did that. I'm sure there are teams, I'm sure there are executives that do that. There's a very fine line between, and Andy used to do this with the defensive coordinators, there's a fine line between trusting them and building their own confidence and trust in themselves and knowing you have their back, and saying something that could even be misconstrued as second guessing, or it could actually be second guessing. You could be, why are we doing it that way? So we tried to engage in constructive dialogues like that, but we were very sensitive to the fact, and Andy did this with defensive coordinators. He would review in tremendous detail the defensive game plan with the defensive coordinator once it was done. And he may make some mild suggestions, but I remember plenty of times where he'd say, I'm a little nervous this week. We're doing X on defense. I'm not completely sold that's the right thing, but I trust Jim. He's really studied this, or whoever it was. So he practiced the same thing that we kind of practiced with him, which was engage in constructive conversations when appropriate. But most of the time your role is to really just help the guy feel confident, show him you got his back and believe what he's going to do. No, we're all making some mistakes, but trusting that, like in a case like Andy, he's going to have a very high batting average of getting it right. So let's not overreact to the times where it doesn't go right, because we've done the same things ourselves.
What do you think your kind of group approach would be in a case with Carson Wentz here, who is struggling on a variety of different levels? Sometimes it's accuracy. Sometimes it's not just seeing the open receiver. Sometimes it's just reluctance to make a throw that he's made many times before. How would you guys as a group kind of approach that to try to rebuild him back to where he needs to be?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's analysis that they're very good at and better than most teams in the league in terms of, what's the root of the problem. Sometimes it's the quarterback, and sometimes it's the play caller, and sometimes it's the offensive line. And, so you really want to break into pieces. What are the things that cause a quarterback to be successful, and how can we, at this point, it's very hard to fix, but how can we make better, those elements, and will creating better elements below him improve him? I mean, I am struck by the fact that seemed to get skipped over even in the moment, especially if you're listening to the analysis of the game. I mean, at one point he was 8 for 10, averaging 11 yards per pass attempt. You don't even see many stretches of top-tier quarterbacks where they complete 80% of the passes and average 11 yards per pass attempt. And what was relevant to me was at that point they had 0 points. Mm-hmm. It should be impossible for a quarterback to go 8 for 10, averaging 11 yards per attempt, not per completion, per attempt. By the way, at the same time, they're running the ball pretty well, and they're averaging only 4.5 to 5 yards per carry. So think about that. They're averaging almost 3 times as much per pass attempt as per rush attempt, and they have no points. So, at that point, you'd have to say, hey, Carson had a hell of a half. What more could he do? Now, I know he threw an interception, a pick six. That can happen. And, that was a tricky play with a 2-man route and a pass rush with max protects that got there much faster than anyone could have possibly. That protection was set up to really give him time, and he had none. So it's not to excuse the play. He screwed up the play. He made a big mistake, but he's 8 for 10, averaging 11 yards per pass attempt. You should be scoring a fair number of points if you're doing that. Now, if I'm there, I'm sitting there going, okay, what did we do right? That he had a half where he went 8 for 10 and averaged 11 yards per pass attempt. What were the things we were doing there? And I'd be right now encouraging us to isolate all of his successful plays, let's say of the last 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever time frame you can do quickly. And let's see if there are things in there, and let's sit down and talk to him and say, listen, we know the offensive line is what it is at the moment. We know the wide receivers are what they are at the moment. What are you feeling? What are you seeing? What do you think could help you be more successful? And I would be supporting it with analytics and a really objective evaluation of the tape to see we're working well on some plays. Is there something fundamentally different about those plays? Are they less dependent, for example, on the offensive line protection? Maybe they're really quick plays. Are they more geared towards a tight end and a running back to throw the ball to than focusing on the wide receivers? Do they tend to be on the outside of the field? Are they tending to be between the numbers? I mean, is there anything we can find that seems to be separating the plays that are mostly successful versus the plays that aren't? And I would try to build on that. And listen, not trying to get back into a run-pass ratio debate, but you don't come out and run as much as they did against a team that was missing their best pass rusher, that isn't very good stopping the pass, as much as they ran the ball in that game, if you still have a lot of confidence in your quarterback. So they can say what they want. And I can talk about it was what I think was a pretty good half, by the way. Not a good game, and he's still part of the problem, but a pretty good half. You got to be able to step back and look at the whole situation and build on the positives. But their play calling in that game, to me, louder than anything they could say, tells us they have, in fact, lost a significant amount of confidence in him. And whether he's picking that up intuitively or absolutely just realizing it, that's the exact opposite of what I would be doing at this moment.
Joe, it's funny because that's where I wanted to go next. For the first time we've had you on here, we really have not talked much about the play calling because obviously we had you on before the season. We've only had you on once before this during the season. So just talking from other teams that do advance on the Eagles, they say their pass game concepts are very similar to last year's, just on structure. And we don't see a lot of the pre-snap movement that we see from other teams other than the Dallas game where they were really heavy with that. As a guy who studies offense like you do, because if folks follow you on Twitter, you're very outspoken when you watch teams about what you like, what you don't like. What do you think about their offensive structure in terms of play calling, pass game concepts, and so forth?
So, I mean, I think what they're doing can be successful. I don't think it's the most player-friendly in terms of, here's who we are and here are the challenges we're facing. I mean, one obvious example, you don't have to be very sophisticated stutter of football, is you can roll a quarterback out. If you're really struggling with the play of the offensive line, and if you have a quarterback that's mobile and throws the ball well on the move, and that part is on him, but at least call the plays that maximizes the chance of success. Right now, they're calling a lot of plays that take a little bit of time, cause him to most the time drop even once he's in shotgun. So that takes time. And counting on the offensive line to provide at least a modicum of protection. Well, it's not happening. It's not happening. So, why stick with it? You can every running back they have is good enough to create a mismatch on a linebacker. Why aren't we seeing a lot of that? They've got a couple of, bigger wide receivers, especially with Jeffries in the game. How can you go through a whole game and not throw him one slant?
Man, we've said this real quick, Joe. Jeff and I have talked exactly what you just said. Every week we say this. We're the inbreakers.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
where's Miles Sanders in the passing game?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
And by the way, realize this isn't the complete long-term answer because the defense adjusts once you start to do that.
Right.
But how are you not at least doing that? Maximize. I mean, we'd all feel pretty good about the likelihood of Wentz to Sanders being a fairly successful play. I mean, those are two good players. It's a relatively easy throw for the quarterback. If he throws it poorly, all on him. But why wouldn't we be seeing that a lot to try to break out of this? This doesn't have to be Sanders. I mean, any of the backs they have, I think, can create a mismatch in the passing game, catch the ball, and put you in 2nd and 3 after we're running a lot on 1st and 10. So get in 2nd and 3 with a quick pass to the running back. Get him in some open space. If a running back's running, let's say, between the tackles or close to it, any missed block can blow up the whole play. If you roll out the quarterback, only one or two offensive linemen have to at least do a reasonable job for you to have a chance to complete the pass. So if the offensive line is injured or not playing well, why not minimize how much they have to do to be successful? So, and again, it's naive and kind of shallow to think, okay, that's just the answer. We should just start doing that every week. Mm-hmm. I'm saying, as it sounds like you are, in this moment in time, with the strengths and weaknesses that they have, and a quarterback who is struggling, what are the easiest throws he can make? This is where I think if they went back and studied his successful plays over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, some of this would show up. This is very hard to do during the season, by the way. It takes every minute they have. You read about coaches that sleep in the office just to prepare for the next opponent. It starts to spend a bunch of time self-scouting in the middle of that. It's extremely hard. But it does appear from the outside like there's some relatively unsophisticated, obvious, low-hanging fruit things that could maybe open things up a little bit and make it easier for some of the players, including the quarterback, who are struggling at the moment.
What do you there were so many coaching moves made in the offseason, and the offense has obviously not improved, it's regressed. At 3-6-1, what do you think Jeffrey Lurie is thinking about his franchise right now? And I'll add in and what would he think as the possibility of 3-10-1, given their schedule, is very real? What might be going through his mind?
Well, first of all, understand Geoff only owns the team because he loves football and wants to win. So he is, if you think you're upset or the fans are upset, believe me, multiply it times 10. And probably extremely frustrated because it isn't a situation to obviously look at and just have an answer to how to fix it. And also would be smart enough to realize that the problem is happening on multiple levels, which makes it a much harder solution. If you just have a coaching problem, or if you just have a quarterback problem, you just have an offensive line problem, you can create a path to fixing it fairly easily. If you're looking at a team and thinking, well, we may have problems at every one of those levels, then it seems like, boy, how are we going to fix this and how long is it going to take? So he's thinking all of those things. He's smart. He understands. He's very pragmatic. I think that he is probably evaluating already at this point, especially what you say with the difficulty of the schedule left, like he's thinking about next year. And what do I have to do this year so that there's no chance I'm sitting in this seat again next year? And in his mind, everything will be on the table. Could be a minor coaching change. Could be back to things like the medical staff or the training staff. Could be major things like head coaches and general managers. I have no insight as to what those what it is, but it's all of the above. That's how he looks at things. He has the good ability to kind of step back and have kind of a macro perspective on things. Now, the hard part for him to do, and I don't isolate him, all of us, is to be really objective about that, because he participates in some of the decisions. And what you really have to do is have people who aren't invested in proving they were right about any given thing and really looking at, forget how we got here. Let's be really honest about where are we? And then let's be really honest about how we get back to where we want to be. And so he's going to have to fight off an instinct to, kind of root to be right on the things he recommended, which is totally human. And I don't care who, every scout, every coach, every person I've worked with has that, challenge to kind of overcome that bias. But he's looking at the whole picture. He's looking at the offensive line, for example. We just talked about it. He says, okay, if we get the left tackle back from injury last year and Lane Johnson is healthy and Brooks comes back and Kelsey comes for another season, is the offensive line already fixed and I just need to be patient? Or am I going to find myself a year from now, because I've got some injury-prone guys and maybe the left tackle is the right guy or not, asking these same questions? That's at least what he's asking himself right now. Who knows what his internal answer to that question is, but that's the kind of stuff he's asking himself right now.
Joe, and I want to stay on the roster construction. At what point, because you got unfairly blamed for the over the 30-year-old situation, and you got to get younger. Quite frankly, that's the way the league thinks now anyway. But
right.
This situation, Jason Peters older, Lane Johnson, Jason Kelsey, Brandon Brooks. Offensive line, defensive lineman, also they have some guys over 30. At what point would you say to Doug Peterson, if you were still there, if you were still the team president, guys, we got to get younger. And it's got to start now. Do you do it in season, or do you keep it to yourself and say, let's wait till after the season? What do you do here with potential lineup changes with younger people?
Yeah, first of all, on the over 30 thing, it was kind of exaggerated. And I guess I got blamed for being right because, as you say, most of the league is now.
Yeah.
And I never had a rule about 30-year-olds. I just felt like you had to be a little more cautious, and you had to be a little more conscious of the contract structure so that in case you started to see some injuries or a player descend, you could get out of it. This is a very hard question because on one hand, we all went into the season, at least I think most people thought they were still good. They weren't as good as they were. I think was kind of a consensus view.
Yep.
So at what point do you kind of abandon that thinking and start to think and play, which is different than think, about the future instead of, this week? It's really hard to ask a coach to do that, especially a coach that I'm sure perceives himself to be at some risk. Whether he is or he isn't, I'm sure he perceives himself to be at some risk. So if I take the hypothetical you presented of being there, I would be sitting down and picking spots. Like, where do we have a backup who may not at this moment be as good as a starter, but we think in a year or two can be a lot better. And let's start to get him some experience. And wherever that was, it could be a linebacker, it could be a corner, safety, guard, it could be anywhere. So I'm not really just for the sake of it going to younger players and trying to see if we have somebody on the bench that could actually emerge and be better than maybe we thought he was. And hopefully that's one less hole to fix for next year. With 6 games left, I'm still going basically all in, trying to win the games, but starting to selectively take some backups who I think have some real future upside and get them as much experience as I can in the last 4 to 6 games.
Are you surprised at all that Doug does not do a little bit more with Jalen Hurts, given Carson's unevenness? And do you think going forward if the struggles continue, we might see Jalen for an extended period of time?
I mean, so my answer is it's possible, but here's the key to the answer to that question from me. I think everybody can watch Carson and realize that he's not playing as confidently as he was. And as I mentioned earlier, if we judge their actions, they're not coaching him as confidently, having the same level of confidence in him as they did. So I think the last thing you want to do right now is add doubt to that, unless you've just given up on him, which I haven't, and I think that'd be a huge mistake. And then you can start to do some of those things. And frankly, 2 weeks ago, to me, it made more sense to maybe put in a package for Hurts than it does now, because I still believe Wentz has a chance to be the guy they need him to be for the long term and do what he needs to do. Am I as confident as I was a month ago or a year ago? Absolutely not. But my baseline belief is that. So part of what we talked about earlier and part of what we have to do, we have to kind of break him down and build him back up. And I think running in and out of the field, it looking like he's getting rotated out because he's not playing well, I just don't think these are the things that give us the best chance to rebuild him. As I say, it's different. If somebody in the building has said, you know what, he's not the long-term answer. He struggles staying healthy. He's playing so poorly right now. He's clearly lost his confidence in his judgment, that he's hesitating, all the things you're hearing. If somebody's made that decision, then I'm starting to play Hurts more and more every week. I would think that's a huge mistake. It wouldn't be my assessment, in which case I'm very worried about sending him any messages right now that do anything other than try to at least incrementally start to rebuild his confidence and his trust in himself week by week.
Well, I just remember when Andy did it with Donovan, putting Kevin Cobb in the game, and then going right back to Donovan the next game, which is what Adam and I have talked about, potentially maybe just bring Carson, have him take a step back, because that's what Andy would say. We just wanted him to clear his head, take a step back. It was not that he was going to lose it for the rest of the year or his life, but just let him kind of, get right upstairs. And so that's where Adam and I have talked about maybe there's some benefit to just, if he's struggling, pull him for the rest of the game and see if that has an impact.
Well, that's why kind of ironically I say if it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I could make a better case for that.
Yeah.
But now that it just seems like his confidence and his decision-making are so, impacted, my primary goal right now is to kind of rebuild him and show my faith in him and my long-term trust in him. And I'm afraid at this point that contradicts my primary goal with him right now to do. And I understand the instinct. I mean, as I say, maybe a couple of weeks ago, that would have actually been something I probably would have suggested, not just been okay with. But now I'm in a rebuilding of him mode. So how can we get him to have some success on the field that will build his confidence? How can we talk to him and set up a game plan that he knows we believe in him? And then just convince him, listen, just let go of all the bad energy. Let go of all the bad things that have happened so far. Just take a huge sigh. Know we believe in you. Let's relax, have fun, and focus on what you do best.
Joe, when Donovan McNabb would struggle, what did you notice? You would go to practice, you would watch the practice tape, and so you watch the game tape, obviously. Was there anything specific Andy did to get him on the right path here? Because you were just talking about what the Eagles could do with Wentz. Do you remember back years ago what anything Andy did with McNabb to get him righted?
Yeah, just in a broad sense. I mean, Andy believed that confidence was built kind of one block at a time through success. So he would try to create, he'd see him come out early in the game and throw a 5-yard pass to the tight end that had a massive chance of being complete. Probably wasn't necessarily what he thought was the best play to call in that moment. But, you see it with quarterbacks, especially when it relates to pressure. If a quarterback gets pressured early in the game, they tend to play a little more scared the rest of the game, even if it's really minor and sometimes hard to pick up. Andy believed the same thing about confidence. If a player started to feel good about things, his ability to execute effectively, if he started to believe in the game plan, if he started to believe in the players around him in any game, it kind of built through the game and increased his performance. So, what Andy would do would kind of use, building blocks one at a time to get the quarterback back to the point where he really believed in himself, trusted the plan, and, kind of relaxed and just went out and executed instead of feeling like, oh my God, you see a quarterback, sometimes you almost see them like throw like this, like they're so stiff, they're not falling through, their arm doesn't look loose. And, he was conscious of that and wanted to get the quarterback to the point where you could literally see in his body language and just his arm motion that he was throwing with a confidence and a relaxed mindset.
Joe, we can't thank you enough for joining us on Thanksgiving and sharing all the wisdom and insight that you always share with us. Really appreciate it. And at the risk of having to put you on the ITB payroll soon, I am going to probably want to ask you to join us again sometime, after January when everything's settled and the dust is, down to talk about what's going on with the team. Hopefully,
I was happy to be on with you guys.
Appreciate
No problem. Look forward to it.
Thanks again. Happy Thanksgiving to you. Happy Thanksgiving to all the listeners, yourself, Adam. Remember, everybody, catch the Inside the Birds live pregame show presented by DraftKings. It's going to start at 5 o'clock Monday night with myself, Adam, Trey Thomas, Craig, and a special guest, actually, at the Goose Island Brewhouse in Fishtown. So we'll have all the updates and breakdowns on the game. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you all in the next episode of Inside the Birds TV.